Thank you to everyone here, old friends and new, for being a part of this live virtual event, and for those viewing this recording. Our community is growing, and I'm so grateful to all of you showing up time and time again. As always, I got to give a shout out to my beautiful, incredible parents who are always supportive and are always here for these events. I have to thank also all of the survivors and their family members, especially Ruth Finkel Wade, Rita Benn, and Ava Dee Adler. Together, they created an amazing anthology of stories with other 2Gs, children of Holocaust survivors, that invite us into a world which few of us have had the privilege of being in. Some of that world will be introduced to us today. Welcome to 2G Tuesdays, a program that brings children of Holocaust survivors and their families' testimonies to people all over the world. And today we're fortunate enough to be joined by three amazing 2Gs. My name is Michael Mantell. I'm a psychotherapist, educator, and 3G, a grandchild of Holocaust survivors. I started these programs in 2020. It all began as a one-time private event for friends and family to honor my grandparents' memories, and as a response to the anti-Semitism that I was seeing and hearing all around me. The first program was titled Sundays with Survivors, and thank God the program was so successful that we continued to add more events and we opened it up to the public. And thus far, we have featured over 20 Holocaust survivors. And in 2021, following the success of Sundays with Survivors, I added this great program, 2G Tuesdays, which has so far featured over a dozen children of Holocaust survivors. Together, both programs have reached thousands of people all over the world and raised thousands of dollars to support Holocaust education and programming. And I'm so grateful that last month, we celebrated 3 years strong and counting. Through this work, I've been fortunate enough to be featured on local news programming and panels and co-wrote and contributed to articles about Holocaust education and combating Jew hatred, anti-Semitism, and anti-Zionism in general and on college campuses. It led me to create fundraising programs and community events, as well as starting a chapter for alumni to combat anti-Semitism at my alma mater, and initiating a support group for Jewish therapists. I also helped write a Title VI complaint, which was submitted to the Office of Civil Rights, and last week was accepted for an investigation into the conduct of the CUNY system in New York City. But most importantly, my work has led me to make connections with incredible survivors, their families, and this great community. My grandfather, Mickey Mandelovich, passed away before I was born, and my grandmother, Alice Diamond, in 2008. However, these programs help me connect with them, remember them, and make sure that their lives and memories live on, and the lives and memories of all survivors and their families to make sure that they are never forgotten. So with today's historic gathering at the National Mall in Washington, D.C., which I attended and why I'm Zooming from an outdoor cafe with you tonight, it had over 200,000 people in attendance. It is an amazing reminder of how connected we are as a people and how important community is for all of us. And with the 85th anniversary of Kristallnacht, which this past Thursday and Friday, November 9th and 10th, commemorating the violent 48-hour pogrom that took place in Germany, Czechoslovakia, and Austria, where Jewish homes, shops, schools, synagogues, were looted, vandalized, desecrated, and destroyed. And hundreds of Jews were beaten and killed, and tens of thousands of Jews were arrested and sent to concentration camps. We are reminded that this violence was a turning point and a sneak peek in what was in store for the Jews of Europe and what we must work hard to do to prevent from unfolding again today. But what is often forgot about and not mentioned is the conference in Evian, France that took place just 4 months prior. This conference, called for by President Roosevelt, was set up to address the Jewish problem. It was clear that Jews were under attack and the international community needed to respond. So in the summer of 1938, delegates from 32 countries met in Evian, France, expressing their sympathies and understandings for what the Jewish people were going through, and offered only excuses for not opening their doors to Jewish refugees, with the exception of the tiny Dominican Republic. No other country was willing to help. Following the conference, the German government was able to say with great satisfaction how astounding it was that foreign countries criticized Germany for their treatment of the Jews, but none of them stepped up when the opportunity presented itself. So what's the lesson here? We are at a turning point right now in world history and for the Jewish people. It is up to us and our allies to stand firm and speak up. It is time to put pressure on Hamas and governments supporting, sustaining, and providing safe haven to these terrorists and people who are condoning their behavior. And we cannot accept anything less. The Holocaust didn't just happen because of the Nazis or because good people remained silent in the face of injustice committed against the Jews and other minorities. But as we are seeing today, it has a lot to do with good people endorsing this behavior everywhere, demonizing Jews and blaming us for what happens to us and believing that we get what we deserve. As I like to quote, history doesn't necessarily repeat itself, but it does rhyme, and we need to pay attention. And as I say during every program, and I'm always surprised at how much more it is relevant each time, while I think these programs are very important, it has extra significance today. With that, I am grateful to introduce to you Ruth Finkel Wade, Rita Benn, and Ava Dee Adler. Ruth Finkel Wade, who was joined on our program 2G Tuesdays last month, is a co-editor and contributing author to the award-winning and recently published anthology, The Ones Who Remember, Second-Generation Voices of the Holocaust. She is a retired training and development executive and currently volunteers at the Florida Holocaust Museum as a speaker and docent. Ruth also assists her Holocaust survivor father, Sidney Finkel, with his speaking engagements. She grew up in Chicago, spent more than 20 years living in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and now lives in Largo, Florida. Ruth's son, Ike, who is named after her father, Sidney's brother, Izzy, is a data scientist with a degree from the University of Michigan. Rita Benn, PhD, is also co-editor and contributing author. She was trained as a clinical school psychologist and served on faculty at the University of Michigan for over 20 years, where she taught and developed programs for students and faculty in integrative medicine, as well as published numerous academic papers and chapters. As a founder of the nonprofit Michigan Collaborative for Mindfulness in Education, she trains educators and youth in mindfulness meditation practices. She also leads weekly meditation practices for cancer support community of Ann Arbor. Rita and her 3 adult children, Rita has 3 adult children and lives in her Ann Arbor home with her husband and golden retriever. In her spare time, she enjoys practicing yoga, painting, writing, poetry, and playing with any of her 4 grandchildren. And Ava Dee Adler is an MSW and also contributing author to the anthology. Ava grew up outside of Detroit and moved to Ann Arbor to attend the University of Michigan, earning both master's and bachelor's in social work degrees. Her career included work with children in foster care, addiction, and medical social work. Ava and her husband, Chef Bert Steinberg, raised their nephews, Matthew and Zachary, and now have grandchildren, Sasha, Levi, Ezra, Maya, and Nora. Ava has a passion for social justice and loves dance, theater, movies, and books. Following the presentation, we will open up the program for Q&A, and as I say, no matter how incredible these programs are, and they always are, the Q&A portion makes it even more meaningful. It's a time for all of us to interact, ask questions, and share our own experiences. During that time, please feel free to raise your virtual hand with the hand raised emoji. Type your question and comments in the chat for me to read them for you, or unmute yourself to speak. Just 2 more announcements. Our next 2G Tuesdays program is scheduled for Tuesday, December 19th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. We will be joined by Ann S. Arnold and her father, Holocaust survivor Mark Schoenwetter. Like Ruth and her father, Sydney, Ann and Mark are a power duo and will be sharing Mark's testimony from his childhood in Poland, his time in the ghetto, and to his escape and subsequent hiding in attics, barns, and underground for the next 3 years until liberation in February 1945. And for this program, if you would like to make a donation to support Holocaust education, we'll be spotlighting the Irene Butter Fund for Holocaust and Human Rights Education. The link will be shared in the follow-up email and in the description of this video. With that, I just want to say thank you to everyone for being here and pass it on to Ruth. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. We are absolutely delighted to be here today. And last month, some of you had the opportunity to hear my dad's story. So yeah, we thought it might be an interesting extension to move into my story along with those of my fellow authors, Ava Adler and Rita Benn this evening. And I also want to give a little shout out to another author who is here with us tonight, Esther Gambosi. Thanks for being here, Esther. The 16 authors of our book, The Ones Who Remember, Second Generation Voices of the Holocaust, belong still do to a Generations After group formed in 2004 at Temple Beth Emmet in Ann Arbor, Michigan. We wrote and led Yom HaShoah and Yom Kippur afternoon services. We told our parents' stories, some of our own perspectives, and some years our children participated too. We are still doing this work, and next year will mark our 20th anniversary. After about 10 years of doing the services, some of us decided to take these narratives and put them in a book. How hard could that be? Well, we found out. But there was much joy in it. And when we finished our first draft at it, and we took it to a few publishers and also shared it with Irene Butter, survivor in our group, the question was that was asked of us was, where are your voices in this? Because the focus was on mostly on our parents' stories. Where is your voice in this? That made us have to think about some very difficult issues. Well, first of all, and if there's anybody here who's a 2G will understand this, we had to grapple with the idea of who cares about our voice as my voice is going out. Who cares about our voice? You know, who cares about what happened, our struggles? It was our parents that witnessed and experienced such brutality and murder and lost families and dehumanization and on. Were our struggles worthy of, of note to write a story about? Who would care about that? And the second piece was, there was a lot of nervousness about betrayal of our families and our family, I don't know necessarily secrets, but our family business that belonged to our family and not necessarily the world. It wasn't a happily ever after story. There was lots of joy in our lives growing up, and there were many gifts that we received, emotional gifts and skills gifts that we received from our parents, but there were a lot of difficulties too. There were many struggles. So we talked all of that through and made the decision to move forward. And we decided that people needed to hear our stories. And since publishing the book, we've been validated that people do want to hear our stories and need to hear our stories. There are so many second generation members out in the world who have felt alone with their stories and didn't realize that there are others out there and have been so impacted by what we've had to say. And really anyone who's grown up in the shadow of trauma has benefited and felt less alone by connecting with our stories in our book. We just received this email yesterday that said, "Thank you for writing this book. I am also a daughter of 2 Holocaust survivors. My father helped establish the U.S. Holocaust Museum and was a chair of Holocaust studies at UCLA. They are no longer alive, and this book was so helpful for me. And we've received, many calls and notes of that kind. So tonight, we're going to each give some of our background and read an excerpt from our chapters. And at the end, we would love to engage in a conversation with you. Please feel free to ask questions. I know Michael already has some questions from you. We're going to start with Ava, and then I'll go, and then Rita's going to close. But before turning it over to Ava, I'd like to share a piece by our author, Myra Fox, who passed away in 2018. This is a poem titled, "Is It Essential?" It is odd that just a year or two ago, this poem was a question. Now, with the rise in anti-Semitism all over the world, it feels like it should be retitled to, "It Is Essential." So, I'm going to read it for you. Take a sip. I wake in the night and curse yet one more time that what my own mom told me is true. Once you are a mother, the worry never ceases. But my son lives in a liberal paradise, a city of beauty and of tolerance. He's working long hours, enjoying praise for his creativity and skills, arriving home tired, enjoying time in the company of friends, and he is happy, it seems. He gets bits of information from friends and coworkers, no time to read the newspaper between jobs, no time to focus on the madness. And I wonder, is it truly essential that he recognize the trouble we're in? That he too lay terrified in the night? That he worry about who will next be impoverished, imprisoned, openly mocked and hated, deprived of the most basic human rights, exterminated? He has already listened to the stories of his grandparents have shared, and he has already heard my retellings. Ghettos, concentration camps, hunger, torture, loss. He knows why our family is so small. So please, can't I instead remind him of the lullabies I sang to soothe him to sleep? Remind him of Roshinkis mit Madlin, dem Alphabets? Is it essential? Is it truly essential? I mourn the reality that the unlikely miracle of my parents' survival, that the unlikely birth of my sister, brother, and myself make it so. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ava.
Well, thank you, Ruth. And I guess we didn't really say that Myra was one of the authors and unfortunately became ill and was not actually, didn't write a narrative, but she'd, in our chapter narrative, but she'd written many poems and we included them also. And it's really great that you decided to read it, Ruth. So I'm Ava Adler, and my mother's name was Minna Adler. She was from Pontelovice, Poland, which was a small village, probably would be considered a shtetl, outside of Krakow. She survived by hiding in plain sight, actually. She had, through some kind of wild circumstances, she was able to receive fake papers and take on the identity of a young Polish girl, a Catholic Polish girl, who had been called up to go to Germany to be a slave labor. Because the men of Germany and boys were not home, the Germans were calling up healthy, strong women to come to Germany, forcing them to work their farms. And my mother went in the place of a young woman that, of course, didn't really want to go. So her journey is in my chapter, from Pontevedra to Windsor, where she learned to speak English so she could become an American citizen. It was there that she met my father in Windsor. He was a distant cousin who also had the same last name as Adler. They fell in love and they married after 2 weeks. My dad's parents had left Poland before the war, so he was born in the Bronx, New York. So theirs was a mixed marriage of sorts, I guess you would say. So I'd like to read to you from my chapter. You could find out more about how they met if you buy our book and you read my chapter. And my chapter is called Memorize This Address. And I don't know if anybody has the book, but if you want to follow along, I'm reading on page 119. In September of 1939, the German army stormed into the village of Pontevedra, Poland, my mother Minna Adler's birthplace. My mother's family was one of only 10 Jewish families left in their town. They owned a large, thriving farm where she lived with her grandfather Moshe Adler, her parents Chava and Meir Adler, her sisters Pesha and Dvora, and her brothers Hersh and Abba. My grandfather died of a heart attack before the war. People said that it was a blessing because he never knew the horrors that were to come. For the first 3 years of the occupation, Nazi officers took over half of the Adler farmhouse. My mother and her family lived in the other half of the house and continued to work the farm, whose harvest was handed over to the Germans. There were apparently 2 reasons why the Adlers were chosen for this honor. The German officers did not speak Polish. And because Jews spoke Yiddish at home, a language very similar to German, they were the only ones the Nazis could communicate with. Also, their home was the nicest one in town, with a sturdy wooden roof and floor. My mother, having painted an idyllic picture of pre-war Pontevedra, never mentioned this shocking situation when she described her life on the farm. My one surviving aunt told her daughter about it, and that cousin only recently told me. It's hard to imagine what this experience must have been like for my mother and her family. I'm sure they must have been fearful. But it occurs to me, as I write this in safety and comfort, that they never could have imagined the true nightmare of what the Nazis had planned for them. One day in August of 1942, the Nazi-controlled mayor of Pontevedra instructed the Jews to report to the village square the next day. My grandmother, Chava, was extremely worried about her family, who lived in a neighboring shtetl. Heeding what they sensed was an advance warning, my mother, aunt, and grandmother decided, instead of reporting, to walk several hours to Chava's family to see what they were planning to do. When they arrived, they were devastated to discover that the entire family was gone. They walked back to Pontevedra only to find that Moshe, Hersh, Abba, and Dvora were also now all gone. Chava grabbed a small sack of jewelry and pressed it into my mother's hand, saying to her and Pesha, "Run, you have to run. But before you go, memorize this address." It was an address on Snowden Street in Detroit, where my mother's Uncle Irving had gone in 1918 to seek his fortune. I find it incredible that in this devastating moment of loss, my grandmother had the presence of mind to try to save her daughters. I'd also like to read to you a little bit about myself. As Ruth said, when we decided to create our second version of our book, the way we went about it was to kind of brainstorm, to sit down and think about things about ourselves that perhaps we had never considered were part of our Holocaust legacy. Things, the way we thought, the way we acted, things that we had taken in. And so I'd like to read to you from my chapter, part of something that I realized as when I wrote this book, or my chapter actually. My mother, the talented seamstress, appreciated quality fabric and workmanship. When she went out, she dressed fashionably in classic styles and colors. After I left home during college and into adulthood, my mother would offer me clothing and jewelry of hers that she thought I might like or need. My taste did not always match hers. Sometimes I turned her down, and other times, in order not to hurt her feelings, I would take things with no intention of ever wearing them and give them away to charity. One day, my mother asked me if I still had something she had given me, and I had to admit what I had done with it. She was obviously upset and asked if in the future I could return things to her rather than give them away. My first reaction was to judge this as selfishness. There were so many people in need who would appreciate our belongings and put them to good use. She then told me that she only had one thing of her mother's, an apron. I was shocked, but it made sense. In retrospect, I wish I had asked her several questions. How did she end up with this apron? Was she or her mother wearing it the last time that they were together? Did her mother offer it to her, or did she ask her for it before she escaped? How did she preserve it while she was on the run, hiding in Germany and in the displaced persons camp? This helped me to see that I had not sufficiently demonstrated my appreciation and gratitude for what my mother gave me, as she would have done with her own mother's gifts had she only had the opportunity to hold on to them. Now I find that I'm sentimental about stuff, things that belong to my parents, my friends, my kids. I keep in mind that my mother had nothing from her childhood, from her past, from her mother. It's hard for me to throw anything away, not necessarily because I think I will need it, but because it brings me comfort and emotional security. So I'd like to pass the baton on to Ruth now. Ruth, you're next, or Rita?
I'm next.
You're coming up again. Okay.
I'm coming up again. Thank you, Ava. That was beautiful. My father, Sydney, his name was Sevik, changed it to Sydney when he came to England. Sevik Finkelstein spent his short childhood in a smallish town called Pietrzków Trybunalski in central Poland. He was only 8 when the war began, and by the time he turned 13, he had been through ghetto, slave labor, Buchenwald concentration camp, death march, and then liberated in Theresienstadt while recovering from typhus. He was completely dehumanized. And his return to love and humanity was a long one. It created a very rocky relationship for us when I was growing up. But tonight, which you can read about that in my chapter, but tonight I really want to focus on healing and legacy. Writing my chapter brought many surprises for both me and my dad. Post-traumatic growth, fellow author and friend, Fran Louis Berg, said, life isn't about what happens to you. It's about what you do with what happens to you. And for me, it's brought deeper understanding of the struggles of my dad, which also created so much more compassion and healing for both of us, and a drive to continue his work. He still speaks to students. He lives in Tucson, Arizona, and he still speaks to students, and it's kind of what keeps him going. So I'm going to read a little bit from my chapter. My father's story of survival enabled us to create a strong bond. With his appreciation and love, I have found myself immersed in helping him communicate his message of tolerance and resilience. We've created a second edition of his book with information from the Buchenwald archives, published it as an ebook, updated his website and video, and started a Facebook author page. I used to get annoyed with my dad. I traveled to see him in Tucson, and after a giant bear hug, squeezing the breath out of me, he would sit outside, smoke his cigar, look at his Kindle, and ignore me. But since I started writing this narrative and reflecting more deeply on his life, I've let it all go, accepting him for who he is and just enjoying our times together. All of my exasperation has melted away. Our last time together, I referred to us as Holocaust buddies, and he nodded and agreed. As my dad entered his mid-80s and cut down on his speaking schedule and travel, I grew concerned about his legacy. And I began wondering, could I effectively tell his story? Some may say it's not my story to tell. Thankfully, I wasn't there. I didn't live it, but I am still compelled to speak. If I don't, when my dad is gone, who will bear witness? Who will provide the personal connection necessary to keep his story alive and hopefully, in this small way, keep history from repeating itself? I took on the challenge, meeting with the director of education at the Florida Holocaust Museum and developing a presentation. My hope was to give students a sense of the connection between me and my dad, as well as telling them the story of Sevek, once a kid just like them, who managed to survive through a dark period of time that lacked so much humanity. My first audience was a class of fifth graders. My dad was so excited, he couldn't wait to hear about it. I love fifth graders. They're the best, he said. He was right about how great they were. When I saw the mesmerized looks on the kids' faces, I understood firsthand the awe my dad felt, telling his powerful story and why he told it over and over again for so many years. In a letter he sent me, he wrote, I didn't think of these talks as being anything special. I was simply telling my story. He may have thought he was simply telling his story, but we've both come to realize that it's so much more. Through his example, we offer young people a path to resilience and hope as they go through their own difficult times. In 2017, I accompanied my dad to a school in Indiana. Afterward, a boy of Sevek's age, when he went to Buchenwald, hugged my dad and told him that he had a brain tumor, but he wasn't going to give up. He said he was going to survive, just like Sevek. My father says that when he tells his story to an audience, it makes him feel closer to his family. I get that. When I tell the story of Sevek, I feel closer to my dad. And I just want to finish off with my last paragraph. I'm not a Holocaust survivor, but I am the daughter of a Holocaust survivor. I didn't live the Holocaust, but I have lived the consequences, the abandonment, the anger, the blaming, and ultimately the unbelievable awe of survival. I love my dad, and I'm grateful that I am capable of loving him. Forgiveness starts with ourselves. Rita.
Thank you, Ruth. And thank you, everybody, for being here and wanting to listen to our stories from our book. I'll just share a little background of my parents before I share some excerpts. That's my mother, Alice Guinness, was born in Ukraine, and my father, Filip Benjaminovich, was born in Russia. And they both grew up in Vilnius, which was a thriving city of intellectual and cultural Jewish life in Eastern Europe in the country of Lithuania. My parents were just 22 years of age in 1940 when they both visited home for a summer vacation from the colleges they were attending in Brussels, Belgium. They had been dating at the time and never thought that they would not return back to school that fall, or that they would get stuck behind the Lithuanian borders as a result of communist nationalism and then later Nazi occupation. Their parents did not want them to come home, but they refused to listen. They wanted to be with family. My parents married soon after in a civil ceremony. And then they and their extended family of about 32 members were ordered to leave their homes and, of course, forced to live with several other families whom they didn't know in crowded apartments in another portion of the city known as the Kovno ghetto. For 3.5 years, they worked as slave laborers and survived many of the early selections of people to concentration camps. Eventually, though, my parents were deported. My mother, together with her mother, Rebecca, were sent to, and other relatives were sent to Stuttgart, and my father to Dachau. The Germans were losing the war, and this was the last concentration camp transport out of the Kovno ghetto, 3 weeks shy of the Russians' arrival to liberate the town from the Nazis. After the transport, the Germans set fire to the ghetto, and they killed the 2,000 or so remaining Jews who had been able to remain in hiding, including my father's parents, Leva and Rosa, his 20-year-old sister, who was my namesake, and several other relatives. Several months after the war, by another set of miracles, they found each other, and they returned to Brussels, where my father finished his engineering degree and later emigrated with my mom to Canada, where he built a successful engineering company. And of those 32-member family, only 5 survived. My mother and father, my mother's sister, Sarah Rubisanyeni, and her husband, Misha, who fought as partisans and escaped the ghetto. And a little cousin named Tanya Verovich, whom my mother courageously saved from the Kinder Action, which was the Nazi edict to kill all the remaining children in the ghetto. So I woven a few excerpts from my chapter together, and I'll just read them seamlessly. Growing up, I relished my mother getting dressed. With her hair flattened, she reminded me of Marlene Dietrich, sultry and refugee-like. When she was ready to go out, Zsa Zsa Gabor and Barbara Walters seemed the more apropos mix. Fashion was my mother's love, and elegance her trademark. Accompanied by the lingering smell of Chanel No. 5, it didn't matter if my mother was going to buy groceries or play bridge with friends. She was determined to leave the house as if she came out of a 1960s photo shoot of Vogue. It took 40 years in Canada and chemotherapy appointments before she dared to buy herself a pair of sweats and sneakers. You could never tell by looking at my mother that she suffered in any way. Though she was impeccable to the outside world in her appearance, the pain of the Holocaust did not stop gnawing at her insides, and for that matter, mine. The fear of death has been an ever-present quiet companion in my life. Since I was around 8 years old, I worried about my mother dying. She seemed the weaker of my 2 parents to me. Whenever arguments flared in the house, her migraines came on afterwards with a vengeance. And in the darkened bedroom, with the window shades drawn down, I tried to ease her distress, bringing her cups of tea or rewarming the washcloth compresses I carefully placed on her forehead. I feared those bulging varicose veins that were popping out of her temples, and the echoes of her rhythmic moans through our adjacent bedroom walls eventually gave way to my sleep and hers. Most of the time, I never really knew what precipitated any of the yelling matches between my parents. Usually they occurred on the weekend in the living room, and as the pitch of their voices raised, their English switched to Russian, which meant I shouldn't really understand what they were saying. I knew it was time to seek refuge in my older brother's room when I heard my mother scream the ultimate pejorative, Hilaria. After I heard my mother's muffled sobs leaking from her bedroom down the hall and the stomping of my father's feet to the stairway downstairs, I ventured out to check on her. I would tiptoe furtively to the bedside where she was resting or sleeping to make sure I could see or hear her breath. My need to check on her in this way became routine. My mother relied on prescription tranquilizers to help her sleep and calm her nerves throughout her life. And my need to check on her continued, even when we were living far apart. Over my adult life, my mother and I lived 600 miles away. And although we visit each other several times a year when my children were young, as the family grew and we got busier with work and the children's commitments, the visits went down to once or twice a year at most. My mother and I spoke on the phone at least once a week, but I often got off those calls feeling depleted or triggered. Since my father died at the age of 16 from cancer, I became my mother's confidant pretty much the rest of her life. The one who heard the cries of disappointment in herself, in her marriage, in her children, her sister, her fears of illness and suffering, and her judgments and perceptions of insecurity and oppression. With my mother and I growing older, I found it harder and harder to bear her relentless unburdening. I felt I couldn't fix the trajectory of her life or her victim mentality, and I wished so hard she could find happiness. Yet I knew I was not her solution. I knew what I needed for my own growth was to create distance, first physically and then emotionally. In deciding to reside permanently in Ann Arbor after my initial move for graduate school, I hoped to instill a boundary that would keep me from falling into her vortex of sadness, or to trigger my frustration and helplessness in not being able to alleviate hers. I struggled with guilt for trying to enforce this choice until the day she died. The day I closed the door to my mother's apartment after she died at age 88, all that I carried out of hers fit into one suitcase. How strange and how sad, I thought, that what remained of such a full life could be held just in one suitcase. What I've come to appreciate now is how much my mother's life could not neatly be packed away or confined into one piece of luggage. That she continues to live within me, and our mother-daughter relationship has not stopped with her death. As a young adult, and an adult who never really knew her stories until the age of 45, I never perceived my mother to be that self-sufficient and resourceful. I didn't realize all the risks she took in her own life during and after the war. My mother always downplayed when I heard the story of how she saved Tanya's life, our little cousin, and she never shared how she saved my father's life during the ghetto years, which you'll have to read about in my chapter. The bravery that she demonstrated was extraordinary, and the humility with which she spoke about it was amazing too. Similarly, with her experiences immediately after the war and in adapting to life in Canada, I feel blessed to be able to see my mother differently now, as a woman filled with grit and determination, independent of me and of what I did or did not do for her as an adolescent or an adult. I see her agility and resilience, her devotion in mothering me and my brother as young children, and her unconditional love. My mother fought a courageous battle to rise above the pain of loss she endured and the extra suffering that she brought upon herself. Yes, she had shadows on her journey, don't we all? I feel only the most utmost respect, gratitude, and compassion for her. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. It's so heavy to hear you read your own words. So I got your book, and it was incredible reading it. And the one thing that I went through in this journey was, normally when I'm hearing a 2G speak, they're sharing the testimonies of their parents. And this is now going beyond that into the relationships that you've had with them. It puts a whole new dynamic where we usually look at survivors as heroes and survivors and see them in these positive lights. As you said, this kind of puts a little bit of the shadow there. Can you share maybe a little bit about that journey of maybe how writing has helped you reflect on these experiences with your families and your parents, or just understanding them in a different way, coming to terms with who they were, what they've been through?
Well, I'd be happy to start. Because I really feel like my relationship with my father changed. If I hadn't, I mean, I say some things in my chapter that are really not great about my dad. But growing up with him, and because of he had this really, he had this survival tactic of, numbing his emotions, and that kind of carried on into my DNA, and his really inability, I think, to love fiercely for so many years. And so I grew up with so much frustration, and not getting what I needed from my father. And to write this book and the research that I had to dive into to keep questioning myself. Okay, if that's how you feel, why is that? And where did that come from? And what was that story? And what did you really know? And what did you really not know? And, to really understand his struggles so much more, see him as this human. And so no less of a hero, no less of, a survivor, to have so much more compassion about what it took for him to just live day to day, created a lot of, and his ability to also process and heal his relationship with his father, because he had walked away from his father in the concentration camp. So he had his own healing to do, but he keeps working at it even to this day. So because of the writing, we have a fantastic relationship today. I think if I hadn't written my chapter, we would probably still be stuck in a place that was okay, but not great the way it is now. And that's why I'm like, so, he's going to be 92. And I like feel so fortunate that he's alive for us to continue healing in our relationship.
Thank you for speaking about it in the framework of healing. I think that's important, especially Sydney's still alive, your father's still alive, but for those whose parents aren't alive, what that healing process or that processing has been like for you. Yeah. If Ava, Rita, if you have any thoughts to share.
I didn't have a real contentious relationship with my mother. But when you're growing up, your mom is perhaps different than other people's moms. My mom didn't take me shopping. She didn't have very many women friends. She felt that I had moved too far away from her, which was 45 minutes away to when I went to college, and then I stayed there. And she had imagined having a relationship with me like she had with her mother, which she worked alongside her mother, running the farm, running the household, cooking from scratch, sewing. My mother said that her grandfather said she made him the most perfect white shirts. He loved them. So my mom could sew anything without a pattern. And we didn't share all those things. So that was a little difficult. And she also was always angry at my dad. They didn't have the best marriage and relationship. And she took to sharing that with me. And that's always a challenge, when you love your mom and your dad. And my dad never said anything bad about my mom at all, even though I'm sure he had some similar feelings, because as I said, they were not happily married. But my mom shared him with me as her daughter, and that was hard, kind of like what Rita said, when you always have to worry about your mother and feel like you have to comfort her. It's challenging. But I think in the end, I too came to realize what a hero my mom was, and how what she went through to survive. She was alone, she was by herself, and I ended up, especially by the time she died, really appreciating everything about her for the most part. And I really came to understand that saying that we have in Judaism, may her memory be forever a blessing. And I took that to kind of mean that you don't, once somebody passes, then you have the, it's like a blessing that you just have to remember all the good things about them and you can let everything else go. And that was a good place to come to with my mom.
I'll just say that, you know, writing allows you to construct a new narrative of your experience. And so that's just, it's also a container. You know, you put a structure around a different perspective, and that's very helpful. And I think in my case too, I wished that my father didn't share anything about his experiences. You know, he felt like I was too, you know, he died when I was 16, and he did not want me to know about any of the horrors, you know, of the Holocaust that he experienced. And I, for the most part, didn't know very much growing up as well. It wasn't until I was in college that I learned that the story about my cousin being saved, the younger cousin. And not until about 5 years before my mother died, when she asked me to listen to her Shoah testimony, did I know all the stories. And I'm sure not all, but whatever she chose to say in there. And that, you know, allowed me to see her differently once I learned of all those stories. And aging has kind of a way also of allowing you to reflect differently on what your relationship was like and healing. So.
Beautifully well stated. I was thinking that maybe aging also has something to do with it, having children as well, and being able to reflect in that sense. We do have a few questions posed in the chat, but maybe I'll ask Rosa and Charlotte if they want to share first, and then we'll jump. We have Dina and Thomas asked a few questions. We'll do those as well. So Rosa, if you want to just start us off.
First of all, I wanted to thank all three of you, especially Ruth, when you mentioned in the beginning, you know, whether your stories were important. I think they're vital, because both for your own sakes, but also for your parents. I was able to understand it more because I had previously heard you speak when your father was there. So immediately when you said what you went through, I thought, of course, because of what he went through with his father, what he told us about the other time. Michael, I wanted to thank you for, like I said yesterday, I received your reminder exactly when I had just seen the news and how horrible it has been, and how good it is to be here, and to be here where survivors are respected, where Jews are respected, where our elders are respected. It's like an antidote to what is going on in the rest of the world for now. And I would like to add two things, if I may, because I've been thinking about them since we were in the GCHR group and you thanked me for being here, like as if I was doing something extraordinary. And what I wanted to say is that right and wrong do not change according to how many people agree with them. And our humanity does not change according to whether people see it or not. It's not, you know, that just because of 3/4 of the world seems to have lost its mind, right becomes wrong and wrong becomes right, or that what Hamas did and is doing is okay, and defending ourselves, I say ourselves because it affects the rest of the world, is wrong. I also want to thank you all, because I don't think I would have been so strong and so committed in this if I hadn't been able to listen to survivors and to the books that were published and all the interviews and everything. if I hadn't been able to listen to all this heritage since I was very young. So even when you feel, like quitting because maybe it seems that what you're doing is not having much of an effect, especially now that we have Zoom and the internet, and you don't know what is going to happen in 5-10 years, who's going to listen to this. I'm here now because I listened to other survivors. So you don't know who this is going to reach. Keep doing it. And I found the book on eBay, so it's on my to-buy list. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Charlotte, if you'd like to share. Thank you, Rosa.
Hi, I wanted to introduce myself because I'm the coordinator for the second generation book group under the Generations After, and we chose to read your book, and then somebody in our group had read it and told us about it, and now we're going to read it next month. So I was hoping to see a lot of my people from my book group here on my book group, our book group. And I saw that Dina asked a question, and so I would like her to ask her question too, because I probably have a similar thing, because we also have a writing group, Generations After. And I should just start off by saying that Generations After was established in DC, or at least the group I'm in is in Washington, DC area. So we have we're either in DC or in Maryland right now. There's several of us, I think there's 4 of us on the book group, from my book group, here listening to the book you guys wrote. So we're, like you, we come from different places. And I was just curious too, because Michael, I couldn't believe, I was going to say, you're not a 2G. So, but you're the organizer of the whole, of this group, like you have, like, because you're a therapist, I guess is. Yes.
It's a good question. I had a little bit of time on my hands during COVID, and I sometimes, so I read a lot of 2G books, survivor books and 2G books, and they speak to me so much, and I think, oh my God, am I a 2G? Like so much of this resonates with me, and then, hearing about these traumas and things that I feel like I've taken on. I don't know. So it just speaks so much to me that I felt like I needed to learn more myself. And I thought what a beautiful way to share with others by having these programs. So that's sort of how it started. I'm always fascinated by people's stories. And I feel like this is one of those. And also, as I mentioned in the beginning, it really helps me connect with my grandparents who are no longer alive. And I don't have the ability to ask them those questions anymore, sadly. So,
Somebody just changed the whole screen here.
okay, thanks for letting me know.
Charlotte, I just want to say that Pauline has been in touch with us to come and present to your book club in DC.
Pauline, right? Okay.
Okay.
I didn't see her here. And so, are you all from different? You're all from different places. You have a common. Michael is your common link.
We met Michael, Ruth and I met Michael this past year when we attended the Holocaust conference for survivors and descendants in DC. So we met Michael there. We had wonderful conversations with him at dinner and lunch, and we heard about his podcast. Yeah, and we had met I had met Olympia 2 years ago in St. Louis at that same conference, and then we saw her again, of course, in DC. And, yeah.
Perfect.
But we all lived in Ann Arbor, Michigan. That's how we knew each other. We all belonged to the same temple there.
Oh, okay.
Even though we all may have grown up in different parts of the world, we all resided in Ann Arbor, belonging to the same temple.
Okay, not necessarily related to the university, but you're all very educated.
That's a lot of why people do come here, because of the university. Either they come with other family members. So that
or they come and they get educated and they stay and raise their families because they don't want to leave because it's such a wonderful town.
Right.
So all of that.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And, you know, I was going to say, Michael, you say you feel like a 2G. That may speak to the whole intergenerational, the trauma that runs through the generations. And, you know, they're doing the research on this. And so that may be what you're feeling there.
I think that's exactly what speaks to me, this idea of what either trauma or this need to survive, you know, those two opposites where I feel like no matter what happens, I'm going to survive and I can survive. And because my family went through so much and they, you know, my grandparents at least survived, I owe it to them to survive. So there's almost like a lot of that trauma and pain that I feel like I'm carrying, which some people see as a weakness, but then there's the strength that I owe to them, you know, that gets me through the little things and the big things. So yeah, I feel like I carry that, and I think you're absolutely right. I think that's speaks to me so much, and by being a part of these conversations, it really helps me process those things that I'm feeling. Yeah. Hearing other people, and that was actually one of the questions, which we'll get to after, because I definitely don't want to lose track of other people's questions, but that was something about themes in the book and also in people's within the book and their own stories. But I will get to Dina's. Dina put it in the chat, so maybe I'll read it for Dina. The question was, how did or do your siblings and children feel about your book? And I would add to that question, because again, I know some parents are alive and some aren't. What was that process of sharing this, knowing either if they're alive what they may feel, or thinking what would they want? Would they want me to share this or not? Like, I would add that to it as well.
And there's I can start on that. My mother would I would not have shared these stories if my mother were still alive, especially the ones that might have talked about, you know, the challenges in our relationship. I mean, she had a view to want to also present to the world this impeccable, beautiful person. And so to really bring up any kind of family issues would not have been something that, or any weaknesses, is not something she would have liked. My mother's sister, Sarah, wrote a book on being in the resistance in World War II. There were very few women who were in the resistance, and she wrote a book about that. And my mother had strong feelings about having her really express her story so publicly to the world. So she was happy to present her stories to the Shoah Foundation because she felt she was contributing to history, but wouldn't have wanted to draw that kind of attention, you know, onto herself. And also there is a sense of feeling like the other when you talk about this experience. And that can be a little bit alienating, and also brings up all the pain that, you know, that you might have experienced. With regard to just my siblings and children, I have 3 children. My eldest, you know, called me up crying after he read the chapter, and, you know, just was so grateful that I had written it. My middle son has only read about a half of it. He just can't bring himself yet to finish it. Very, you know, not quite sensitive soul. His wife, though, immediately read it and called me up, also crying. And my daughter, who I would have expected to have read it right away, has not read it yet. And so that's fascinating. And she says that, she says to me that she feels like she knows enough of the stories that she doesn't need to read it. And I think maybe it's too close to her if she does read it. And my brother has read it and felt, you know, he was really happy that I had wrote it. He asked me for a book to give to his stockbroker, you know, etc. So I know it's funny, but that was his way of saying, wow, good story. But I don't think his perspective on our family is the same as my perspective at all. And he is not as interested to delve into the stories as much as I have been. So
yeah, I would say the same. My brother said he came into one of our talks and in Chicago, and he took the microphone during Q&A and said how proud he was of me. But I think, you know, he would also say, you know, he doesn't have any, there's nothing, you know, he didn't inherit anything, or there's, you know, from my dad, you know, there's no trauma inherited by, you know, the Holocaust. You know, he's just fine. And, you know, I kind of like roll my eyes a little bit about that because I can see, but, yeah, but it was, you know, he was very nice, and he's very proud of what we've done. And my son has a little piece actually in my chapter, and he's always like, he's grew up knowing my dad's story, and of course he didn't really know much about mine, but he said, you know, he read it right away, and was, you know, really, I don't know, you know, we actually have never really talked, you know, he's never really asked me any questions about it or anything like that, but he's just sort of accepted it, and is proud of it. And my dad, you know, my dad said, you know, he didn't want to read it. And I said, I really want you to read it. And finally he said, okay, I'll read it. And then I said, no, I don't really want you to read it. So once he said, I guess I think I just wanted to hear him say, you know, yeah, yes, I'll read it. But then he did read it, and he said, yeah, he was hurt, but he said, but he's, you know, he was 91 at the time. He said, I don't have time for hurt feelings. I don't want this to get in the way of our relationship. And he actually gave me some information. We had an interesting conversation about his wife and his second wife, and who was not my mother, and why, you know, our family was the way it was. So that was enlightening. And so that's been good. I mean, I just, you know, and the more I do these talks, the less I want to read the excerpts that are like the rocky stuff with my dad. You know, I don't want to hurt him anymore. Like, I wouldn't want him to listen to this recording and hear me read those parts. But, you know, I think like I said, I think without that, you know, there's that context there for why we have a good relationship now. So without that, and without doing the writing, we wouldn't be where we are today. So, and I think he gets that too.
Well, I guess my situation is the same but different. You know, I don't think I would have written this if my mom was alive. My dad probably could have taken it with a grain of salt, but my mom would have been very upset and feel like I had revealed secrets. My younger sister passed away. May her memory be forever a blessing. And my middle sister was the problem sister in our family. And right now, she has a lot of, she's become disabled physically and mentally, and I'm having to help her out with a lot of things. So I was reading her the book. She asked me if I'd read her the book. My chapter, well, we started with my chapter. And in my chapter, I thought I was pretty gentle, but I did mention the fact that she had given my parents a lot of problems, and that I had ended up raising her children because she couldn't. So she looked at me when I read her that part. She said, now, what did that have to do with the Holocaust? So she was not, you know, happy to read that. Now, my two sons, one of my sons is he's a CEO or director of a Jewish nursing home in Seattle. Wow. And he's very proud of it. And I'm not sure if you read it, though, I have to say. And then my younger son, I'm calling them my sons. These are my sister's sons. They're really my nephews. And my younger nephew, Zach, his wife read it to him because he has ADD. And I don't know if he's ever read a book all the way through that he, you know, other than a school book. But he said that when he asked his wife to read it to him, and when she read it to him, he called me up. He said, Ave, I understand my place in the world. I understand now. I understand exactly who I am, and I understand exactly what I have to do. And he is a stay-at-home dad to 2 daughters. And he feels confident. And he moved down south, and I was really upset because he moved to Georgia. And I'm like, you're going to raise 2 daughters down in Georgia, OMG. And he said, I'm not worried. He said, I'm in charge of them. You know, whatever, however things go, if I'm not happy about the way things are going, we'll keep them home. Sarah and I will teach them all the right values, and I'm good with it all. So he felt, I think, empowered and powerful.
That's beautiful. I think that the themes that come up in this book really speak to anybody, and you don't have to be a child or grandchild of Holocaust survivors to feel something common with your own experiences. I think we all feel that there are things that have been passed down from previous generations, and we wonder, you know, do we take certain things on? What is part of us? What are some things we can learn from and not repeat, et cetera, and things that we want to hold on because they're meaningful and dear to us for different reasons. Yeah. So Dina, I shared your question, but you have your hand raised, so I would love to call for you to speak. And then I know Thomas had a question, and I would love to keep this conversation going for a little bit longer if I could have you all. So we'll just take it a few more questions. So Dina, please.
Michael, I'm sorry I didn't see you amongst the 100,000 plus at the memorial today. Ladies, I'm with the Generations After also, as Charlotte indicated, and I coordinate our 3 writing groups. And we presented, 3 of us with our mentor, presented at that conference where you delivered an excellent workshop from what I was told. And following on your footsteps, we are also hoping to publish our memoir, but our anthology of memoirs. But ours is different in that yours has a fuller scope of your family experiences, where ours are more like vignettes. But if you have any tips on how to get published, you can let Pauline know, because she's part of our writing group.
Yeah, well, hopefully you'll be there. Hopefully you'll be there too when we can share all that.
I will definitely be there. I actually bought the book several months ago. So Yasher Koach, ladies, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dina. And
Did you just say that you would be at our book group meeting? What were you going to be at? You said you'll be.
Well, she has asked us if some of our authors can be present on your January 7th meeting, and I have a call with her in a couple of weeks to talk about format and what she'd like, and etc., who should be present. So we're happy to share with you, you know, whatever we've learned to facilitate it. And we've done that with a group in Toronto already, you know, because I think other people are, once they've read our anthology, are excited now that they want to start writing too. And we started as vignettes. So, you know, you never know where those vignettes will take you.
Right. Although we have, like this, we have conversation after our meeting, after we discuss the book we've read, you know, then like you were saying, Michael, the emotions come pouring out of like how, you know, this book we read, they made it too easy. It wasn't that easy, you know, or it definitely wasn't true, or, you know, we had lots of conversations afterwards too. Right.
And I want to remind others that if you have any questions or comments, you can please feel free to share. We did have a lot of people in the comment section say thank you and just give you so much gratitude for sharing these stories with us. Just to go to Thomas's question, he after giving thanks, he says, do you feel that the trauma your parents suffered is part of your DNA? In other words, it will be a part of you always, and to one degree or another, passed down to your children?
Esther is here, and I think that was, I thought she coined the term, but she actually said, you know, the Holocaust is in our DNA. So I think that that is very true. You never can tell, nature versus nurture and how much is passed on. And so, yeah, I think that, of course, our parent, every generation, you're hoping they have less anxiety than the previous generation or the previous trauma. And I hope that's the case with our kids, as well. As a second generation, I don't know what the rest of you feel. For me, I'm Jewish first and I'm Canadian and American second. But my American friends or Canadian friends who have Canadian or American parents feel that they're American first or tied with being Jewish. So, and that's, I think that's directly related to, being a survivor, the child of Holocaust survivor parents.
Another question, were there any chapters that didn't make it into the book? Will you be making a second anthology? Or is there any talks about doing more writing and publishing those?
We made a very conscious decision that anybody who wanted to contribute a chapter would be able to contribute a chapter. We didn't want to leave anybody out. We feel like some chapters are better written than others. But I mean, that's always going to be the case, even if we're all, super writers. And we were really fortunate. Rita met an editor who looked at our book overall first because we were, a little underconfident about the value of what we had to say. And she, gave us some validation and some help with, some structuring. And then we offered to everybody in the group to work with her as a developmental editor. And so each person could work with her individually on their own chapters to make them stronger. And every one of us did that. And it was a really great experience. It was, an interesting experience because I thought my chapter was done and then I got it back. And at first I looked, the first time I looked at it, I saw so much like those red marks when you do the review changes in Word. And I just had to put it aside for probably a week. I was just like, oh my God, no. And then I looked at it again and I was like, well, yeah, I accepted probably 90-95% of what she offered. And it's a better chapter for it, and it's a better book for her assistance.
In my case, my chapter doubled in size and quadrupled in size, and then it had to go back and be scaled back again because of their comments. And she really worked to help us differentiate each chapter so that even if we had common themes amongst us, in one chapter that theme would be exaggerated more, emphasized more versus another chapter, so it felt more distinct from one another. So I would recommend if anybody's thinking about writing. We are not thinking of writing a second book. This was our. Some people are writing memoirs. I've decided that they're going to write a memoir, and we'll see if that comes to pass. And we are continuing to write, but because we write Yom HaShoah services for our temple, and so in those services we write vignettes of our parents' stories and our reflections. And so, we will continue to write in that way. And maybe we'll write a short story here or there if we're ambitious, but I don't think we'll do another anthology like this.
Sorry.
I just want to say something about what you said before. We were talking about what's in our DNA. And it seems really pertinent again because of everything that's happening in the world. It kind of started with Trump being elected as president, and it seems like it's been one trauma since then. And I found myself just during that period of time arguing with people and getting so emotional and so upset. And other people could like argue with you and then they just laugh it off. Like it wasn't that big of a deal. It was just politics. And for me, it was just drilled down to my DNA. And I felt it in this completely different way. And I didn't really realize it until we started writing ourselves and thinking about what are the things, you know, about the Holocaust that have impacted me so much. And I realized that that's what it was. I couldn't just shake it off, whether it was racism or anti-immigration or anti-Semitism, all of it. It was just hurt me in a different way, it seemed to me, than a lot of other people.
And two things that we sort of touched upon, but there were questions about. Number one, your identity as a 2G. So how strong has that been, or how important has that been in your life growing up? And now you sort of touched upon it a little. But I wonder if you have any more to share about that. And then another question, which sort of was touched upon, any writing advice or advice for people who are looking to explore this idea of either family members who are Holocaust survivors or just in general retelling their family story?
I'll just say about being a 2G. My father never spoke about his story. I didn't really think, I was recently trying to figure out when was it that I recognized that he was a Holocaust survivor. And I can't quite pinpoint when that was. It might have been in my late 20s. And he never spoke about any of his thing until I was in my 30s. So, and then, but, in my 30s, I'm busy, I'm raising a family, I have a career, so really wasn't until I was closer to retirement that, well, I guess that's not true. Okay, I joined the 2G group in 2004. I think that's really when I really started to take on a role as a 2G, having that community behind me, beside me. And then from there, just built up from there up until now. And now it's pretty central to my identity and how I operate on a day-to-day basis even. And sometimes it's like, I think, I need to like scale it back a little bit, do some other things. And so I work on that a little bit too, to create a little bit of balance there for myself.
I'll say from my perspective, I don't think I was conscious of its importance in my identity as a child in that regard. However, I took a Holocaust education, course in college. I was very aware of being different from my friends because they all had grandparents and cousins to go to on the weekends, and I didn't have any of that. Or my mother and father had an accent. So certain things, that the issue of belongingness, I think, was probably an issue from an identity perspective, or not belonging. And in Canada, in Quebec, where I was growing up, there was a lot of concern about separatism in Quebec and the French Canadians, and there was bombings and mailboxes. And so there was, and then the Cold War was occurring, and there was talk about a bomb shelter. So there was all of that in the backdrop of the family, but I didn't think of myself as a 2G per se. I don't think I thought of myself as a 2G really until after my mother died. And then my mother's sister, my aunt, asked me to write an introduction to a book that she was writing on what that experience was like growing up, knowing that our parents were Holocaust survivors. And then, it sort of hit me like I'm a 2G, so to speak. And although I do feel like I remember having children when we made the decision to have children, that I wanted to bring a lot of children into the world to help kind of replace the ones that were lost. So that was very conscious. I had 3. I would have had 4. My husband said 4 and I'm gone. So we decided just to stay with 3.
I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah. I thought, okay, can't do that.
Yeah.
Um,
I think that I was just going to say that I kind of had an interesting religious or not religious upbringing. My mother was the Holocaust survivor and had grown up in Poland. They kept kosher. They spoke Yiddish at home. They had the sons were studying. The Torah was kept in my family's home in the village. So she had that kind of sensibility. My dad, for some reason, got really turned off to kind of the organized suburban Detroit version of Judaism. And we never joined a synagogue. So, which upset my mother. So I didn't think of myself necessarily as a 2G. I mean, I think that's something I learned about within the group. But I did think to myself, geez, I got to join. How do I not join a synagogue when my whole family died to be Jewish? I mean, it just made no sense to me not to belong and not to support a Jewish community. So that really motivated me to join TBE. And we got so much support from the synagogue and so much feedback in that because we did the Yom HaShoah and Yom Kippur afternoon services every year, our stories became the whole congregation's stories. The choirs crying during high holidays, and and I wouldn't go into it, but they were part of how we rolled out our book. We rolled it out to them first. They were the very first ones to read it. So I think my identity as a 2G kind of was a work in progress over time.
I wanted to respond to your other question about writing, the other part that you asked about it. I would just say that, Ruth and I offer writing workshops if people are interested in that. And I would just say to begin, just don't think you have to start at the very beginning. Just start wherever you are. If you want to write about your Passover experience with your parents growing up, or, when was the first time that you learned about the Holocaust, and just, sit down and write. And it'll be, and then the more you write, the more you remember. And then the more you revise and you add. So I encourage you to begin writing, both as part of your healing journey, basically. Everybody, whether you're a 2G or not,
Right.
Writing is healing. The same way going into therapy is healing, if you have the right therapist.
So that reminds me that during our conference, I was in this in your group, and you had those 3 prompts, and we were in this group with other people, and I will say it was so cathartic and amazing. So you're absolutely right. I think one of the things that you said was just right, and so much came up, and we had so many defenses of what we were going to write and what people would think, but it was also so much fun and beautiful. So it's really
Yeah,
nice.
I think one thing about the workshops and also in our writing, as what's very different, I'm excited about, the DC panel was great. And I'm excited for what you're doing there too. But is to have like this safe place that you can write, and not, with a group that maybe hasn't had the same experiences as you, but appreciates the experiences that you had. And it's just a safe place for us to be and for us to write together. And I think that, gives you a lot of courage, having that.
I'll also give a little shout out, that I took a memoir writing class myself, maybe 10, 15 years ago, through Gotham Institute in New York. And it's an online, it's in person or online. And it was fabulous. So it allowed you, they gave you kind of every week different kinds of instructions on writing about something, and you had to write, and then you had to give it in, and you got feedback. And it was a very safe place and a wonderful place to start, writing your own story. So And that's one place, but there's so many other places. So sometimes a class just helps you get structured. Because it's hard to just be disciplined every day, right? And sit down and write. But when you have to produce and they have a deadline, that's helpful for some.
It's funny, you brought up a few things that were other questions. I feel like we can go on forever, so we'll try to wrap up. But one of them was when you first heard your parents' Holocaust testimonies, you started to share some of that. But Rita, also you mentioned when you were 8, 9, or 10 with the Cold War, and your response to that, how you had this fear of dying or your parents dying. So one of the questions was also when and how do you feel it's best to share about these intense testimonies, just about family testimonies or traumas, or even what's going on today? Is there anything that you would share with how one could approach that with younger people or just in general?
I think you just have to be sensitive to what the children's questions are and not shut them down, and just, you don't have to give huge details, right? Like when I would ask my parents about something, they would, they said initially, well, we're not going to talk about it. Well, right away, if they're going to say we're not going to talk about it, gee, I'm more interested. Also to want to find out, and then your fantasies arise as to all kinds of things. So it would be much better for them to say, we lived in terrible times and you're safe now, and those things that we experienced won't happen, and when you're older we'll talk about it more. So you have to be very attuned to the child's age, but open to talking about it. And my parents didn't share, unfortunately, a lot of the joys of their childhood. And that would have been helpful. Like another one of our authors, Joy Wolfenzer, in her book, her parents shared so many stories that it made them seem, her grandparents felt alive to her, so that her mother could really go past the pain and be able to share some of that. Where in my family, our parents, my parents weren't able, I think, to do that piece. Somehow their experiences in the war wiped out, or numbed a lot of those memories. So, and Joy's mother did share also stories of, hardship, but just in a way that they could hear it. And there are lots of great, novels out now, that are appropriate for 10-year-olds and 9-year-olds, and so that it doesn't overwhelm them. But I am very grateful that I'm not bringing up children now. I'm very grateful that I brought up that we lived in an era where we could bring our children up then. It's just, I think, a much more challenging time now with what's going on in the world, with the internet, with a lot of pressures that families have, and I feel for my kids.
I think Lillian also had a question or comment, and then I wanted to wrap up by asking first. So Lillian will go, and then if you have any final thoughts or anything to share with us, then we'll wrap up.
Hi, Mike. Nice to meet everybody from Boston. I actually just really want to thank this idea of group writing. I have not thought of. I have had this life 2G mission that everybody has to find their way to share, but you have to find out first what happened. It's like you are born into this, but you don't even know yet. So that I've been involved so much. And by the way, that DC conference, are you referring to the Child Federation?
The World Federation.
Okay, that's what it actually is. And they brought the descendants in. I've been very involved with them in past years. We held it in Boston one year. But everyone trying to find your way. Writing is great. I think the idea of writing your own book is overwhelming. And I think this idea is really cool. Get group writing and chapters, I think helps a lot. It just is overwhelming. I have a ton of documents from my parents. It's so overwhelming. But I have lots of vignettes. So I appreciate very much how you've shared that. And also the arts, that too, I talk about, there's all forms of art. how you can express music, film, painting. And I know people in all of it. And I know in Boston, we're trying to develop for second generation to speak. My mission personally has been for second generation to even figure out who they are and get to know that part and then go do something with it. You know, now you know it, you know, share it. Thank you. Thank you very much tonight. Yeah.
Thank
Oh,
you.
thank you so
Thank you,
much.
Lillian.
And what you said really resonated with me, I'm sure everybody. And you know, one of our authors, Fran Louis Berg, she didn't know any of her parents' stories. So when we do memo writing, and I get people who say, I don't know, how can I write? I don't know. But you can write about that. And her chapter title is Osmosis. And she says, you know, it's seeped into our souls. Even though we didn't know our parents' stories, we felt them. They had a dramatic impact on me, you know, on them. And so, you know, you can write about that, you know, you can write about that feeling of not knowing. So I think, yeah, you know, you just write what you can write, and other people will understand, because there's so many 2Gs that don't know their parents' stories and can relate to that as well.
Can I ask, I've been reminded tonight, going back in time, one of the first writers and book, I don't even know what happened to him, Thane Rosenbaum, Secondhand Smoke, which is an amazing story and it's real. And he was so way ahead, or at least ahead of me, because his developmental stage was his mother was dying. And we were not there yet. I mean, I didn't know anybody. We were just sort of figuring this out as 2Gs. And we were angry people back then and young. But he was, I just learned all that in perhaps the last decade or two with other 2Gs and what that is like. But he talked about, that's the story. He has 3 aides with his mother. And it's a great, great story. Nobody knows him. I've wondered what happened. Okay.
Well, you just spoke to the issue of age, and I think being of this age is a great time to write your stories. I think we said that if we were like 20 years younger or 30 years younger, we would have written things differently.
Yeah.
I think that, you know, we have some wisdom, even if we have some
and the healing
trauma, and
healing is big.
Yeah. And so I encourage, you know, yeah.
Great. That's great.
Lillian,
If anybody wants to get a hold of any of our authors, you can do that through our website, which Rita posted at the beginning, or through Michael. So
yeah,
you know, if you want to know more about the writing process, or have us to your book club, or you know, any of those things, we're always happy to, you know, contribute.
Thank you. And
we'd love to come to Boston too. So.
All right. That's great.
Lillian, you mentioned that there's different ways to express yourself as a 2G. And it just reminded me, this is a little bit off to the left, but our rabbi, Josh Winston, is in Tel Aviv right now. And he sent a video walking through the square in Tel Aviv yesterday. And it is full of art installations. The way that is, at least many Israelis are.
You mean right now that they're drawing? Oh, that's so great.
I can't
art therapy.
Yes, they're doing art therapy, and they've put it all in the square. And so they're combining it with the pictures and their feelings. I couldn't even really begin to explain it, but I suppose there's something you could do. He put it on Facebook. So did you guys see it, Ruth?
Yeah.
Rita?
I saw him walking through the square, but then it stopped. So I don't know. It didn't go through. So I'll look at that.
Yeah, go back and look at it. There's about probably 15 or 20 different variations on art installations to express their feelings right now. And I thought it was pretty amazing.
Thank you, Lillian, and thank you for bringing all of that up for everyone. And I just want to ask again, those last thoughts, anything you can leave us with, and then we'll wrap up.
Well, I guess I'll start and say, I actually did a docent tour with 7th graders today and really focused on dehumanization and not being a bystander, being an upstander, and even small gestures of, make a big difference in people's lives. And I appreciate everyone being here today and, understanding that message and carrying that on, that, what we do does make a difference. And even though it may seem, an overwhelming time, what we do makes a difference. And we don't know, someone might be quiet, but that doesn't mean doesn't mean they're not affected, doesn't mean we're not making a difference. So just to, keep doing what we do and making a difference. And I really appreciate you having us tonight, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. And I just want to wish everybody safety and peace. And, and may we see a resolution or an easing of the violence amongst all people, really, everywhere.
Oh, Ava, you're muted.
Yeah, I think that if we can reach some kind of dialogue, and there has to be some understanding in the world that two things can be true at the same time. And right now, that's what seems to be happening. We have 2 groups of people that have been suffering, and they can't seem to understand that the 2 things can exist at the same time. So whatever kind of way, I heard about some place they were trying to get Middle Eastern people and Jewish people together to have conversations. And they said that what they managed to do within this conversation, and I think this was younger people, is for a Jewish woman and a Middle Eastern woman to realize that they look like sisters. Mm. And and that became, out of everything they had said to each other or tried to talk about, in the end, that's what they could hold on to.
Yeah, we are all human beings.
Yes, and we're cousins with the people that we're fighting so badly with, I think. So.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you, Michael, for carrying the torch.
Thank you, yes.
As a young person.
All of you, because
as a young person.
Yeah, I appreciate everything. You have brought me into this fold so kindly, sharing and being willing to share your stories and your book with us. So I can't thank you enough. I wish you so much success with everything, and I want to thank everyone for being here. And hopefully December 19th, God willing, we'll see all of you there as well again for 2G and survivor testimony on Tuesday, the 19th at 7 p.m. Eastern time. So thank you all. If you do celebrate.
Thank your parents for being so patient for you.
Thank you, guys.
and a big shout out to your parents for raising such a wonderful son.
Oh, that too. That's right.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. This is going to inflate my head so much. We might just take a hot air balloon home.
Okay.
Well, thank you all so much. And thank you everyone for being here. I look forward to seeing you all again. Take care and be well.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.